I listened to a little bit of your podcast, and it seems like you've been doing that for quite some time.
Yeah, we just passed episode 300, so we've been doing it for about 6 years, once a week.
That's just incredible to me that you've been able to do it consistently that long. What got you into podcasting?
Well, I was a podcast listener, although not particularly to gaming podcasts. I listened to a lot of stand-up comedy podcasts, actually, and it became apparent how engaging that medium was
Hmm.
in terms of building audiences for people. And when I was hanging out with Ken at convention, just chatting around the dinner table at our host place, I realized that, hey, other people might want to listen to this. And in fact, we sort of did a proto Ken's Time Machine segment where he explained how you'd have to go back in time to have America have a decent Medicare system. And so that idea stuck in my head as something that would help build an audience. And so it took me a little while to convince Simon at Pelgrane to underwrite it as a promotional expense, but it's really paid off over the years. And I think that the weekly schedule is a big part of that, that you really need to sort of get people habituated to. There's a particular day when you listen to, this person's podcast and you expect it to come.
That's really true. We're expected to give out free episodes and entertainment on time on a specific day. It is interesting as a podcast listener too, of just, it didn't come out this week. I wonder what happened.
Yeah. And the great thing about podcasting is it fills otherwise dead time, right? When you're commuting or doing the dishes or
Definitely.
or whatever it is. But there's a real intimacy to listening to audio, particularly while you would otherwise be bored, that I think builds a real bond and has been very helpful to both of us in building audiences for our stuff and helping Kickstarters and so forth. And plus, it's fun. I get every week I get to talk to Ken.
I was gonna say that. Yeah, you get to hang out with your friend and talk about whatever you guys want to talk about, really. And yeah, it's a little bit sometimes more format based, but still, it's enjoyable. It's a way to get friends together.
Right, and it was very intentional on my part to have a format where we're talking about very specific things, and we're talking about things for a fairly short period of time, and and I think overall, the response has been very gratifying.
Welcome to Roll of the Dice, a Game Master's Guide for Better Role-Playing. I'm Dan.
And I'm Lee.
And today we're speaking with writer and game designer Robin Laws. Hello.
Hey, how you doing?
You've written so many things throughout your career, just to name a few. Earth Dawn, Feng Shui, Hillfolk. You also have 2 books about helping story writing, Hamlet's Hit Points, and Beating the Story. Well, could you describe the methods of finding rhythm and beats in a story?
So any narrative at all, and not just even like a fictional narrative, but a nature documentary or a commercial or even a piece of journalism, written journalism, engages by having an emotional rhythm. And the building, if you are aware of the building blocks of narrative and aware of where your narrative is going emotionally, how it is engaging the viewer's sense of either hope or fear, that you can then more finely calibrate the mood of your piece. And if you start to look at narratives that don't quite work, that cause you to disengage, that kind of bore you over time, you will often see that they fail to do a couple of simple things in terms of what story accomplishes. The 2 main building blocks of narrative, the 2 key moments in any story, fictional story particularly, are procedural. That's a moment in which the character that you care about is trying to overcome an external obstacle of some kind. So, he's trying to escape the rock that's rolling after him, or hack into the database, or, fend off an attack from a crazed zombie or something. Or then there are the dramatic beats in which one character seeks out an emotional reward from the other, and either gets that emotional reward or is denied that emotional reward. And so adventures and genre stuff and most role playing leans very heavily on the procedural side of things, of overcoming those obstacles. But often the things that make us care about the characters and whether they're going to succeed or fail are the dramatic moments in which we care about them as people and relate to their emotional struggles. And so basically the system of beat analysis that it started in Hamlet's Hit Points, which is devoted to role-playing games, and then is continued in Beating the Story, which it broadens the scope to other narratives in general, is all about knowing what sorts of beats you're using. And there's some other sort of side beats as well. And seeing the arrangement between them and seeing the emotional line that the beats strung together create.
As a GM, maybe writing their first adventure or story, or they've done it for a while, what advantages do you have for writing this all out and then being able to see the beats in the story, the analysis of it?
Well, just as a screenwriter wants the filmgoers to be engaged, or a novelist wants readers to be engaged, the writer of an adventure wants the GM to be able to engage their players. And so if you look at the line of your likely narrative, and of course the thing about role-playing is that there shouldn't just be one likely narrative, but a series of possibilities that could result in a different story. But you want to make sure that there are opportunities where success is difficult, other opportunities where success is easy, moments where sort of fun and engaging things that make the players feel powerful can happen, and other ones that engage suspense and their sense of fear. And even more so as a GM, if you're paying attention, just sort of in the back of your mind, that you can map out every beat that you create in the course of a role-playing session, but it's onerous, and really you should be paying attention to what the players are doing and not doing all this bookkeeping. But if you just sort of know in the back of your mind what the general shape of a successful story is, you can spot the moments when players are getting stressed out and need a moment of sort of fun or relief or power, or on the other hand, that they're getting cocky or feeling bored and need you to sort of bring the hammer down or tighten the screws, as it were, and give them more of a challenge to deal with so that they re-engage with the story and they start to be worried about failing their mission, whatever that is.
I think you did a great job in the 2 books of showing examples that I think people can connect with, like classical stories and also TV programs such as Hamlet and the X-Files home episode. And I think that's really, really great for people to be able to then point out, because not everyone reads classical stories, and not everyone watches the X-Files maybe. But
well, that's the thing these days, is that it used to be there was sort of a shared corpus of narrative that everybody had in common. And as role players and GMs, being able to draw on a set of shared assumptions about what the basic components of storytelling are would be enormously advantageous. People's viewing habits and reading habits have shattered so much in the past 30, 40 years that there's no one thing that you can count on everybody knowing anymore.
Yes.
And so whether it's knowing Hamlet, which is one of the foundational works of English literature, or the X-Files or Mad Men, you can't necessarily assume that anybody knows everything anymore. But I tried to pick examples that were reasonably broad and had an interesting pattern to show. So, for example, Hamlet, you don't really necessarily think of that as being as procedural as it is, but it's a real sort of mix of procedural and dramatic beats. Whereas Dr. No, which I talk about in Hamlet's Hit Points, has, I think, maybe 1 or 2 dramatic beats, but is otherwise purely procedural.
When a GM is looking at beats in the game, is there any way that the players can help, or the players can plan to help the GM with their...
Well, it's always great to be proactive, so that if you are a player and you see the rest of your the players sort of starting to disengage or get bored, or on the other hand, that they're starting to freak out and they're getting paralyzed because they're too terrified about what's going on, you can sort of work to be the GM's friend and think, well, if the GM had an NPC come through the door right now and try and change the mood, what would they do? What would they say? So if you see, for example, in the classic example of the group has lost all hope and they've gotten deadlocked and they're rejecting every possible solution to their problem, including probably the 3 top solutions the GM assumes they're going to use and has prepared them to be able to succeed at, you can then sort of take a step back and say, oh, look, things can't be that bleak. There's got to be some way out of this. Let's take a step back and remember who we are. We're super powerful characters in this world, and we're really competent. So let's forget all this nonsense about not being able to succeed, and let's assume that we can succeed and pick the best way out. Or, vice versa, if you see that everybody's sort of goofing around and losing track of what's going on and not caring anymore, you can then come on with your character and say, listen, it's time we got a grip on this. Remember, the Owl Bear Society is going to come into town and flatten it in 3 hours if we don't do anything. We've completely lost the plot here. Here, let's buckle down and find a solution. So either way, you can kind of step in and be the NPC that the GM would otherwise have to inject into the situation in order to change the mood and get people not back on a track, but back on any track, back in any forward motion.
Sure, that can be really challenging for, a GM, a writer, when their adventure kind of falls apart, but you have to look at character backgrounds, what the players maybe want. But when you're writing out a story or maybe an adventure, how do you have room left over for maybe players' ideas and actions that maybe would affect your original story idea that you had figured out or planned out?
Well, what I try to do is to, and this takes more space, but to make sure that they have choices that they can make that will materially change the story, so that I don't have a story. I have a premise, I have a situation, and I have a bunch of stuff that by default could be the most likely thing to happen, but rather that's sort of a fallback. And whether it's something that's very tight, like the investigative scenarios that we write for Gumshoe, where you expect there to be a pretty well configured narrative that leads toward the solution of a mystery, or it's something that's more open-ended, like in Feng Shui. It's basically there's 3 fights connected by fun, colorful plot material in between. I recently did a demonstration of how to create an adventure that's full of choices for the HeroQuest game system, that is one of the 3 systems now used for the Glorantha setting. And it's a chapbook that's available through the Chaosium site in PDF, and it's called Mother of Monsters. And so the idea is that the characters wind up in a new city, and they get involved in possibly political intrigue that can be resolved by going and fighting the spawn of this horrible immortal monster that emerges from the jungle. And rather than give one, here's how this is going to go and here's who your patron is, the adventure starts with the players having a choice between 2 main patrons or even other patrons along the way. And so their choice that they make right at the beginning radically alters the whole shape and form of the entire adventure and makes it theirs, right? So they haven't been presented with you're working for the patriarch, or you're working for the dock workers union, or you're working for these immortal sorcerer guys. You get to decide, and that decision changes the tenor of everything. So what I would encourage GMs creating adventures to do is to not look at them in terms of, oh, here's my story, but rather here's my premise, and here's the choices that the players get to make within the premise in order to feel that they are materially determining the course of the adventure. Because otherwise they are just spectators to a story that you are sort of writing, but expecting them to finish.
Yeah, they have no input or outcome or any creative input into the role-playing story sharing idea that we're doing around the table.
Right. Now, there's a paradox with published adventures in that an adventure that is very linear and doesn't allow that many choices is more fun to read on the page and easier to follow. Whereas the more choices that you present the players, the more it becomes sort of a kind of a nebulous description. Well, this could happen and this could happen, and here's a chart of how everything could go. So it's less fun to read the way that's, a lot of classic Call of Cthulhu adventures are just a lot of fun to read even if you don't have a group. But they are much more fun and interactive when you play them, and become clear in play. Because of course, a role-playing adventure is like a screenplay. It's not the finished product. It's a step in the creative process that results in a game session, just the way a screenplay eventually results in a movie.
When you're looking at these progressions and beats for these characters, and you're talking about like a linear story, like maybe if they're picking an adventure module and it's very linear, what should a GM do as far as like figuring out what beats are needed for the characters and like where the character is going? Because they might have something in the background that says, hey, I really want this character to become this kind of hero or this kind of person. Does the GM then kind of sit there and say, how can I get him there? Or do you usually work together with the character to do that?
What I would do is, first of all, put that choice to the player. And rather than say, what kind of character are you going to become? I would suggest you say, what are two possible contrasting outcomes for your character? And in the game Hillfolk, you literally establish your two dramatic poles, the different sides of you that could determine two possible endings for your character. And so, for example, in The Sopranos, is Tony Soprano a family man who's interested in his family, or a capital F family man is, and he cares more about the mafia? Or, in Breaking Bad, is Walter White a mouse or a monster, right? It's those two possible contrasting choices. So rather than being you, the GM, who's saying, I'm going to bring your character along until he's the hero who fights off the dragons, you say, well, what are two possible directions that your character could go in? And then the player says, well, I guess my guy could either be a hero or he could be a hypocrite. And so then you build in choices that for that character in which they can go in that one direction or the other direction. And therefore, it's a matter of some suspense both to you and to the player as to where they wind up after making a bunch of those choices. So that rather than having a preconceived notion for that character ahead of time, and then just hoping you can kind of herd, like a sheepdog, herd the player to making those choices that you wanted them to make, create a situation where two possibilities exist, and where they're going is a matter of suspense for everyone at the table. Because unlike traditional narrative, in a typical role-playing session that you're just playing at home and not streaming for others, for example, you don't have an audience other than yourself. So you should be surprised by what happens in the game, just as you would want to be in a suspenseful film where you're the passive observer.
I really like that, because it's sometimes they may think they want to become the hero, but their choices they always make are the hypocritical choices. And even the GM or the people in the game might see that. So they're conflicted in themselves, and they have that conflict from what they want to be and what they're becoming. And it becomes like a character trait, or what I'm trying to say, character, something, the flaw that they have to overcome themselves.
Right. It's surprising in role-playing games how often the supposed heroes make a lot of really skeevy choices.
Yes.
And, it's like, am I the champion or am I a murder hobo?
Exactly.
And so you can, make that part of the text of what you're doing rather than something that makes your story weird. Because why are if this was a TV show, they wouldn't be doing this horrible thing now, these supposedly sympathetic characters. So then you can, make that part of the deal, like, explore why it is they're making those choices. And sometimes it's just because the players are thinking short term and they are thinking of their characters as playing pieces. And so you can, help make that real by having emotional consequences for when they murder hobo it up. And conversely, though, of course, that they get a sense of emotional reward when their better selves come out and they do the right thing and they move in the heroic direction. You have to make sure that you're not always, punishing them or treating them as rubes or, humiliating them or taking power over them, which is something that GMs, particularly beginning GMs, can make the mistake of doing, in that they are creating the adversarial universe that it's always supposed to be pushing back against the heroes. Well, yes, that's true. But sometimes it is just as powerful and important to reward the heroes and especially when they're behaving in a way that if not you, the universe wants them to behave. A passive observer would want them to behave. That they have people come up to them and say, "That was really great the way that you drove off those bandits," rather than always hitting them with yet another new problem.
I think we've all played murder hobos throughout our role-playing career. Do you have any memorable characters maybe when you were playing that when you realized maybe I shouldn't be playing these just random killers that come into a town to quote solve a problem or become the problem?
Well, first of all, I have always, even when I was younger, mostly been the GM.
Okay.
But when I'm assigned the rare occasions I get to play are usually like one-shots that are run by somebody else. And so as what I'll just do is, if I'm given a pre-gen, I will find a way to make that character active and give opportunities for other characters to interact with them. So if you give me a sort of a skeevy kind of psycho damaged character, the way I was the last time the Pelgrane gang ran a Fall of Delta Green campaign, I'm going to run that character to the hilt and really, go there. Whereas, if you give me someone who has the opposite goal to keep everybody together and mediate that, I will do that, but always look at ways to connect to other characters as well as to drive the story in the direction where it seems to be headed. So the key, I think, to playing, a lot of people will play an extreme character, but they do that in order to say no. Mm-hmm. That they, we've all heard my character wouldn't do that. Well, have a more interesting character who would do things. How about that? You want to make sure that if you're making bold choices, that they're bold choices that create movement toward a satisfying conclusion, not just a stupid conclusion where everybody winds up jailed by the king's men, but also something that other people get the opportunity to bounce off of and also riff with you and do cool things.
How can when you approach it, like you say, you approach a pre-gen made character to give them something that other players can interact with? Do you have any tips for, like, we're going to GenCon this year, and most likely all the games role-playing games we play are going to be pre-gen stuff, but there's going to be a lot of people playing those kind of characters. Is there any tips to them as how they can play those characters to interact with people besides just, I don't want to say it does happen where you stereotype a character and play it to the T, where that, like you said, the king's men might come at if they keep acting over the top that way. How can they approach it?
So there's a couple of questions there. The first one is as the other characters are describing, or as the other players are describing who they're playing, think of a couple of connections that you might want to make to one of the characters. So you might decide that if you're sort of the kind of damaged jarhead soldier type, you might decide, the medic character is going to be my buddy, because I always buddy up to the medic, because weirdly enough, I often need medical treatment after the sorts of things that I do. And so immediately sort of, kind of create a little mini scene where it's like, you and me, we're like this. We're, that last mission together, you saved my bacon, and let me tell you, I'm here for you. And so you're automatically creating a relationship that isn't necessarily on the page with the different sets of pre-gens, but you're taking a ball and offering it to the other player. Now, the other player hopefully picks up the ball. Sometimes they don't, but they hopefully do. The other thing is, if you feel that your character is set up to foster extreme behavior, make sure that you always also give the other characters who you're possibly disadvantaging a way out. So just as a GM, I will sometimes break character and say, are you sure you really want to do that? In this particular Fall of Delta Green game, of course, my character immediately, ended up in conflict with the superior officer. And so when it came to the scene where I was going to frag the superior officer, I stepped out of character to that player and said, if you want to play this so that my character backs off, I'll do that, just to make clear that the character is being horrible, but I, the player, am just creating a situation that is full of tension and interest, and that I'm willing to steer it back to a safer place. Now, it turned out that given that choice, the player said, nope, bring it on. And so he wound up dead and then undead in fairly short order because, he picked up my move and decided to amplify it rather than seeking to modify it.
A lot of stuff you say, other GMs mention as well, such as the background figuring out a way to connect to another player. So you already create that situation where the players know each other or have a history with each other, and it sets it up that you can interact easier, I think. And even setting that up in pre-gen, I think, is a great idea for players. If you're going to play a pre-made game or a demo game, it's a great idea.
And the idea of always bringing a ball from the GM or other players to pick up is something that you can carry through into your home gaming. Over the course of an extended series, it's often the case that the players will all sort of gather together. You have your snack phase if people, bring takeout or what, you're just chatting about the news of the day. And then when it comes to the GM sort of reminding you what has happened and what you're doing in the game, it's sometimes the players can all be, oh, yeah, right. And so if you want to sort of speed that process as a player, just on your way to game, think of what's one thing my character wants to do based on what happened last time. And so that rather than when you get to that phase, you can be the one that says, oh, well, I want to go back and talk to the alchemist because we got sidetracked with the Owlbear Society cutting. But he mentioned something that I wanted to pick up on and go check out because, of course, I want to figure out a way to, make my fireball wand more powerful or whatever the details are, doesn't matter. But the idea that you have an idea of something to do. Now, if you get there and the GM says, well, the Owlbear Society is overrunning the town, you go, oh, well, that idea, I had that, and I'll just put that back in my pocket because obviously Owlbear Society. But absent that, when the GM is looking for you to play in the sandbox and look for something to do, you've always got an idea. The trick is to just make sure that you're not trying to impose your idea no matter what else is going on, or that you are bigfooting all the other players by always being the other one with the idea. Because ideally, you want to sort of, by example, encourage other people to do the same. There are some players who are just sort of casual and are happy to always go along with whatever's happening. But for the rest, you can expect that other people want that sort of access to the spotlight time as well. But it's often surprising how often players sort of just sit back and wait for a plot hook to happen rather than sort of meeting the GM halfway by having a plot hook over their own as one of the possibilities to throw in the mix at the beginning.
You've seen in the industry that maybe that some games are lacking, like maybe they're missing. Maybe this game is all just about adventure, hack and slash. And when you created Gumshoe and having that investigation, and also for Feng Shui, and then adding crazy movie action feel to it, I guess my question is, how do you, just looking out there, what do you see that's lacking in the game industry? Or, I mean, not necessarily industry, but in other games that you would like to bring out?
I don't think there are cases where the design goals that I'm given are to address an existing problem. So Gumshoe is an example of that, where one of the problems that was meant initially to address is the thing where you roll for information and you don't get the information. Mm-hmm. And if it's crucial information you need to move through the plot, then either you're stopped dead, which you would think never happens, but I know for a fact does, because it happens to people at conventions, and because I'm the Gumshoe guy, they come to tell me about it. Or more likely, the GM then has to spend 20 minutes justifying how they got that basic information to tell them to go to the Ghoul Crypt. And so Gumshoe, of course, says, don't do that. You just automatically get any information that's useful or interesting to have, because it's never interesting to fail to get information. And there are other things where it is interesting to fail, like it's consequential to fail to get over the fence when the Shoggoth is chasing you as to succeed. Mm-hmm. Although worse, obviously, for the character. And so that was an example of the publisher coming to me and saying, here's this classic problem, create a game system that resolves that problem. Okay. And then once we did that, it turns out there's all sort of interesting knock-on effects from the other choices that I made in designing that system. Most notably, you can make the mysteries much more involved, because it's no longer about, do you get the one clue that takes you to the next scene, but about assembling all of the information and figuring out what's going on. In general, though, I don't design by looking at what other people are doing wrong and trying to do it right, so much as when I'm presented with something, a genre that I haven't tackled, or a property that I'm asked to adapt. The question is always to me, what is the core activity? What is the fun, interesting, active thing that players do in this game, or that makes it different than other games? And how do I create a system that facilitates that and supports that without paying attention to a lot of other things? So that if there's a game that's about Hong Kong action, the design is, okay, how do I enable something that feels like a John Woo action sequence? So one of the answers there was, let the players also define what's in the environment, which seems like a super obvious thing that everybody does now, but was a big revelation when Feng Shui first came out. And then conversely, make sure that you don't get sidetracked. And because it's a Hong Kong action movie game, there isn't a system where you're carefully building your magical vehicles, because that's not what the game is about. There's no economic system or no concern for money, because that's not what that game is about. Whereas if someone said, well, how do you make sort of a space trader game where the economic system is the most important driver of everything, that would change that set of questions, and then I would build out from that as a core activity, because there the core activity would be your traders building a trade route, and then everything would support that core activity and that core concept.
So speaking about Feng Shui there, do you mind talking about why you wanted to create a game like that?
So I got the great advantage of seeing that Hong Kong's action cinema was going to hit nerd world a couple of years before it did. The Toronto International Film Festival sort of pioneered the showing of commercial Hong Kong movies in like the late 80s and early 90s. And as I am today, I was then a regular attendee of the Toronto Film Festival. So I saw that there was this subgenre that had not been tackled before, and it's something that I loved and really wanted to bring to the fore. And it did, and it made me think. When you see the action sequences in The Killer or Hardboiled, you think about how fights work in a D&D, and go, oh well, yeah, how can we do something that's as fun as this and allows us to picture this going on in a role-playing game, which up until that point was very structured and limited and sort of about saying no to the players when they wanted to do things. And so what about a game where you say yes to the players when they want to do crazy things? Like, is there a set of skis here in the restaurant? Well, yes, of course. Whereas, the tradition would be the GM carefully writes down what's in the restaurant. And if it's not on the list, well, no, you can't do that. And so and in turn, people took that and, built on it and sort of broadened it out. And, a lot of people have told me over the years that it changed the way that they run every game, not just Feng Shui.
I would agree that Feng Shui opened up my eyes for the improv, which is yes, and you're supposed to say and add that to role playing, because and letting that player use their imagination or copying scenes from their favorite Hong Kong action movie and say, let's do it. Let's see what happens.
Right. And it's so obvious in retrospect, it's actually hard now for those of us with gray beards to look back and remember when that wasn't the thing, and that, it would be unthinkable for you as a player to say, well, there's a set of skis in the restaurant, right? Because otherwise, before Feng Shui, the GM would go, whoa there. It's not on my map, man. And I don't have rules for hitting someone with skis. So hit them with your sword the way the rules tell you, whippersnapper.
Exactly. Well, I obviously assume that you're a big fan of that genre. What are some of your favorite movies?
So my very favorite movies are things like 8½. The Fellini movie is my favorite film of all time, which could not be less like most role-playing games. You could do it in drama system, the rules that underlie Hillfolk. Yojimbo by Kurosawa is great. You can tell definitely the classic Hong Kong films that underlie Feng Shui. I wrote a book called Blowing Up the Movies that mention all of those and look at their structure. There's a film called The Sympathy for the Underdog, a Japanese film from the late 60s that you can see that John Woo took a lot of the atmosphere and romanticize violence and kinship between enemies. My favorite films of last year, I think Get Out was really brilliant. And in theaters now, the things that I think are fun, Ant-Man and the Wasp is really well done, and has not just fun action, but great interaction and feeling between the characters. There's a movie just out called Sorry to Bother You, about a African-American guy in Oakland who gets a job as a telemarketer, and he prospers when he learns to speak in a white voice. And that's what you see in the trailers and stuff, but it has a twist. It goes in a direction that is much more nerd-oriented, and if that was in the trailer, more gamers would be going to see it. But if it was in the trailer, it would also ruin things. So trust me, Sorry to Bother You is also really great.
I heard great things about that movie too, yes. Well, do you have any, I mean, we're talking about movies, but now I'm going to change topics back to role-playing. But, I mean, we always tell you to steal cool movie ideas and whatever and put them in your games. But do you have any favorite role-playing games, or are you GMing right now with a current group?
Yes, I run a game every week when we have quorum. It is essential as a role-playing designer to always be playing. It is very easy to forget how role-playing works. And sometimes you can tell when someone submits an adventure that's like, you used to role play. You probably GM'd 6 years ago, but I can tell you've forgotten how some crucial things work. But the reality is, because I have so many projects on the go and because I design so many things, that my job is to be a bigger expert on drama system than anyone is, to be a bigger expert on Gumshoe than anyone is. So I almost exclusively am running my own games. I'm gonna be working on a big couple of source books for an existing game I didn't design, and so unusually soon I'll be embarking on that. And if there's after GenCon, I could tell you what it is, but we haven't announced it yet.
Oh, sure.
So right now though, I'm running drama system because we're looking at doing some more drama system stuff, and I wanted to get my headspace back there. And before that, I ran for a year and a half the Yellow King role-playing game, the new Gumshoe game that we kickstarted last year, and will be getting to backers pretty soon, later this year.
So you said you'll be at GenCon announcing a project you're working on?
Yes. So it's not a it'll be announced on social media and stuff, because no one will know to be there for me to show up as a surprise guest and announce what this thing is. But this will be my next big project, even as Yellow King continues to work its way through the list. But I'll be doing a bunch of events that people want to swing by at GenCon. We're doing a live version of Ken and Robin Talk About Stuff. There's a dramatic interaction panel where we talk about drama system and games like that. There's one GM, one player masterclass that ties into Gumshoe 1-to-1. There's an investigative role-playing masterclass. So whatever flavor of game you associate me with, there's a seminar to come by and talk about that. And if is this episode dropping before GenCon?
Yes. Actually, it's going to be after GenCon.
After GenCon. So never mind, people. You could have come by the booth and got me to sign your books, which you already knew, and I'm sure you did. So thank you, everybody, for swinging by.
So it's my fault, too.
What are you excited to see this time around in GenCon?
I'm looking forward to seeing who wins the Diana Jones Award. That's always a really interesting choice of things that really sort of points as to where the direction of the hobby is headed. And so, and as per usual, they're wildly disparate things up against each other. Looking forward to going to the Ennies. My prediction is going to be Arc Dreams year with their Delta Green stuff. So we'll see if that happens for them. And but mostly for GenCon, it used to be that I could go and sort of check it out and see what other people were doing, and I had spare time and I could walk the floor and see what all the new cool stuff is. But as the hobby has grown, and as the audience for Pelgreen stuff and other things I've worked on have grown, I'm basically, I'm behind the booth. I'm, want to talk to people who want to, talk about my games and get stuff signed. And so it's much harder now to know what's going on in the whole broader hobby, just because it's exploded at such an incredible degree and just keeps getting bigger and bigger. So and even just within role playing, let alone tabletop in general, as D&D's audience is getting bigger and bigger and bigger because of streaming, and now D&D is getting close to gender parity in its audience, which is astounding, right? That's a doubling of the role-playing audience, and D&D is back to its traditional role of sort of being a filter that brings people in, and then a couple of years later, after they've killed all the dragons they want to kill, people tend to go off and find other games and play them, and so we're going to see really interesting ripple effects, and more so than any time in our history, there's been, whatever your style is, whatever you're interested in, there's a type of game design that serves that. So, we really are in a golden age where not only the creativity is there, but the mechanisms exist to get games into people's hands and to support the creation of games and to keep people like me, working and going and doing new things and continue to explore what is still a relatively new art form.
Yeah, it's just going to keep on growing with the internet and people playing online with all these, Twitch and online shows. It's reaching new people that had no idea, or they heard about D&D or role playing, but that's not something I could get into. Yeah,
so introductory D&D stuff is in Target now, and there was a brief period in the '80s during the initial D&D craze where it looked like it was going to go mainstream, and then it kind of fizzled out again because it was so complicated and hard to get a grip on. But with the existence of streaming and stuff, it's much easier to figure out what the heck role playing is and to emulate that. And also, just there's the fact that nerd culture is now mainstream culture, right? The big movies are not All the President's Men and Coming Home or The Deer Hunter. They're Marvel movies, they're DC movies, they're everything is nerd culture now. So
yes.
We have taken over pop culture, and it's no longer a stretch to figure out what role playing is and find another way, a more direct way to engage with all of the tropes that people find so compelling.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. We're going to be at GenCon. Maybe you'll see us around. Maybe we can sign some of our books and maybe talk some more. But yes,
thank you so much for having me, and I'll see you surprisingly quickly. GenCon is rolling down on us like a big old rock.
Yeah, it's coming quick. Well, if you want to catch more of Robin, listen to his podcast called Ken and Robin Talk About Stuff. Robin is joined by his fellow writer, Kenneth Haidt. Did I say the last name correctly?
That's correct, yes.
All right. They talk about gaming, food, history, movies, and anything else that they feel that they want to discuss. And you said you're going to be having a live episode next on the floor?
That's right. I believe it's sold out. But again, that's irrelevant to our purpose because you, the listener, are hearing this after GenCon. So you either already had a ticket, or even if you didn't, it doesn't matter because it's over. But you'll be able to hear it by going to kenandrobintalkaboutstuff.com, and it'll be dropping shortly after the show.
Wonderful. Hey, thanks again for joining us. Really appreciate it.
You're most welcome.
Yeah,
Take care.
You too. We decided to release this as a bonus episode because he is going to be at GenCon releasing something.
Ooh,
and
yeah.
we're hoping to be there to talk to him about it.
Mm-hmm. We'll be the press that breaks the story.
I'm sure they'll find out first, and because we have to find out what it is before we talk to him about it.
Yes. So
stay tuned for that one.
Yeah, bonus episode. But you can still find us on our website, rollofthedice.com, roleofthedice.com, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube. We're out there.
We're out there.
We're out there, yep. We'll be doing lots of stuff. I think we mentioned in our preview episode of GenCon, episode 40. Bonus episode, episode 41. We're going to drop in right after that. Just to give you
talk about what we're going to do at GenCon.
Mm-hmm.
What our plans are. So
yeah. So that's our next episode. Next episode, again, as we yelled in the other episode, GenCon!
GenCon!
All right.
And remember, keep shaking those dice.
And may your roll be true.